Afternoon, all. Hope you're good. Hope you're getting me loud and clear. As per usual, say hello in the comments if you get tuning in live. Many thanks to the many of you that then tune in on your. I notice people are tuning into the video or podcast version of it on their commutes, either that later that evening or the following morning and stuff. So I get a bit of a spike in feedback then, which is really interesting. But those that tune in live, it's great because we can have that interaction. Some brilliant chat yesterday, and I hope similar today. I've been giving it some thought as to what to cover today, looking at the list of various topics, and thanks to those of you that have been suggesting them. But and yesterday, I mean, banter is one of my favorite forms of feedback, and so I got some grief yesterday from Meekins for potentially delivering some clangs, some name drops from media appearances that I was leveraging as anecdotes. However, I'm going to go again today, just because I'm going to go double down on it, is that partly because of Therapy Live Sport, 7th of November, by the way, get your ticket. I've been interviewing some of the best and brightest and having pre-conversations with the great guests that we've got on the show. But we did a pre-recorded interview with Non Stanford just this morning, and it was a great chat, and I'm really looking forward to getting you that out at Therapy Live Sport. But what it also did is it made me realize that the reason we've integrated so many athletes into the program at Therapy Live Sport is because they are the patient voice within an athletic pursuit. They are the people that are patients, but they are also professional athletes. And we always want to try and integrate patients' narratives into our understanding in MSK practice. And for those that have paid attention to MSKR's work, we've always done that. And so it's important for us to get those voices out there. And in the case of professional sport, those athletes are our patients. And so that's interesting. And it made me think when speaking with that, we are sometimes at risk at this point in time, rightly involving the patient narrative and patient voices. We are also, I think, at risk of then, basically shining light on the stories that suit our biases in such a way, and not necessarily giving a fair shake to all of the different patient narratives that are going to be out there, including the ones that fly in the face of what we're wanting to promote, which has its challenges. I understand why it happens, but I just wonder if anyone else has had that noticed that as well, that we're elevating patient voices rightly, but the danger is that we're elevating the ones that suit what we're trying to say, or that can certainly exert an influence on changing our behaviors, but in ways that are more palatable. We're not necessarily getting the patients on that are going to say, that we perceive to have the wrong opinion. It's like, I know it sounds so funny, but it's kind of that there's a compatibility of their view. So patients that come on that then suggest, well, people didn't take my pain seriously. People didn't realize the complexity surrounding my story. People didn't listen to me, and then we're learning and improving because of that. We're not getting people that are then coming on, and we're not elevating the voices that say, well, basically, the therapist didn't recognize just how malaligned my pelvis was, and finally, I found a therapist that put me back in place and did so weekly from then on in for the rest of my life. Like, I spent a lot of time shopping around for therapists, and then finally, I found one that put my pelvis back in place and was willing to do that on a weekly basis. And until I found them, my life was a misery. Why are we not? Because those people exist, right? Those people are out there. Those people we encounter in clinic on a semi-regular basis that have got sometimes unhelpful and inaccurate beliefs as we feel they are. Why are they not the ones that are on a panel talking about patient narratives? Why are they not the ones that are then given an opportunity to try and instigate reform within our industry? And it's because every story is going through a filter of evidence-informed practice that we are applying, and then it's the ones that sort of are suiting the agenda that then get amplified. And I'm not suggesting we need more voices that are talking what we'd consider nonsense, but we just also need to recognize that there's not even a veneer of objectivity to this, right? It's just that to some extent we're handing a microphone to things that suit amplifying messages that we do, and that's a concern. Now, the reason why my conversation with Non flagged this particularly was that it was not an interview in which I was ever going to be challenging if she'd have been someone that said that, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have someone that will put my pelvis back in. I would have been surprised knowing her as an athlete, but she could have said that, and I wouldn't really, it wouldn't have been something I'd have got really adversarial about. But she was mentored by Kelly Holmes, and Kelly Holmes was someone that was on Twitter the other day, and I think it was that she was being sort of tortured, for want of a better term, or a style of therapy that was very painful, back down on the cushion and got like cupping and whatever else was going on, load of passive movements of a recent surgical ankle or whatever it was. And so it got me thinking about, I mean, I'm amplifying Non's voice here, and Non was making points that you'll see at Therapy Live Sport, but basically, like, she's just saying sort of top tips for therapists is treat people holistically and understand the various different factors affecting their symptoms and why that might have happened and the stresses in their life, even though they're athletes and stuff. It was fantastic. But then I was also thinking that of course, I mean, if we'd have been able to get her on the show, I never really pursued it, but, you know, I'm not saying that I wouldn't have had Kelly giving her take on the matter. But what I'm meaning is that if you had, I'm just going to take a stab at saying, you know, Kelly might say, look, I don't care if it hurts. I needed someone to break down the fascial adhesions and scarring that were occurring in and around this, and I needed someone to lift the fascia through cups, and you know, this, you know, quite structural understanding of not just a condition but also what she needed to get better. What I'm getting at is we're shining a light on things that suit us, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily for real, but I'm just meaning that potentially not finding a way to appropriately amplify what might be a common perception, and then identifying how we can counter that, or potentially having, for me, it's wonder if we can find ways to appropriately broadcast a challenge of a narrative that we don't like, or that we don't agree with, or that a patient having that negotiation with a therapist in real time about why we disagree. You know, it's like, I can see that helped you, but, you know, said caricature patient that I mentioned before, I can see that, you know, you perceive that you need to be realigned. I personally, I don't think that that's what that manipulation does for these reasons, and maybe amplifying that in real time. However, that would be incredibly challenging. It'd feel discompassionate to do that. It'd feel like I wasn't appropriately applying empathy to offer that challenge. And I have witnessed in even myself, when I've been interviewing patients, one of the things that is off the table is me confronting them as I would a colleague. I do treat patients in an interview situation with more kid gloves than I do my fellow therapists, or even a coach or someone that's sort of interprofessional dialogue, because the expectation of knowledge is different, but also that, generally speaking, my empathy dials are turned up. I hope I'm appropriate and polite in interview, full stop, whoever it is I'm engaging with. But generally speaking, I am going to stop short when someone says, if a therapist was to suggest a modality as an adjunct or something that was sort of central to their recovery, that they perceive as being central to the industry, and I just feel like, oh, you know, do you mind justifying that with a patient? Whilst I might follow up, it'd not be that I would then have an expectation of them to change their mind, and I think that that's what seemed to concern me. That two things really. Is this actually? Am I right in identifying a minor problem there? Is it a minor problem? Is it even a problem? Is it something that needs to be corrected for? Is it something we're aware of? Like, are we realizing it? Is it surprising to you guys that I might feel that way when discussing things? Or if we're thinking about co-creation, co-production, it's quite a buzzword at the moment, and appropriately so, in terms of it being a bit of an ascendant methodology for integrating patients into research methodologies, as well as making sure their voice is heard, and people who've had that problem or condition are being alongside therapists and coaches to talk about that. But how representative are those people, and why are, you know, how could we elicit the opinions of Joe and Josephine blogs who've had those things, who have socially conditioned opinions that are sometimes not in keeping with best evidence, best practice? And when I think about the messages that we've put out there, and the voices that we've amplified over the years, you know, it's sometimes difficult to know because they're representative in some ways in that their experiences and the fact that they've then come out of that is good. But I think it's interesting. Now I've got some comments popping up, and as ever, great comments are often great questions. But Katie said, expert patient selection bias, all tricky stuff. Yes, agreed. It's something that the selection bias piece for all of us, and also the availability. It's not just a selecting from what's there, but also like what voices emerge is often because they've been in a healthcare circumstance. You don't hear from the people that had a intervention that we might frown upon, but then got better and then stayed better, and therefore why would they even be? They won't consider themselves a patient. It's interesting, isn't it? Persistent pain patients continue to be of that identity rather than someone that, well, I had this knee problem for 6 months and then got over it well and recovered well, and therefore I don't consider myself. It's not part of their identity. They're unlikely to engage with other professionals necessarily to help us move forward. David has said, does every opinion deserve an equal platform? I would say not, and we can choose what we do and don't give platform to in terms of what angle we pursue. But I just think that sometimes if we're ignoring the fact that we are spin, it is a version of spin. It is a version of influence in which sometimes that imbalance needs to be at least acknowledged, I suppose, is where I'm at with it. It's not that I don't think you could even give every opinion an equal platform if you tried. I think it'd be really silly to try. And another question from David, where do lay people and athletes get their health information from initially? I think that there's a sort of socio-cultural overlay to how we understand and interpret pain and injury, but also the ways in which it seems to vary in terms of how influential certain coaches or therapists or fellow athletes are at different stages of people's careers, particularly when they come to the sport front. But then also there are improvements in multidisciplinary teams around athletes, and having spoken to some of the athletes ahead of Therapy Live Sport, it just seems that, and we've not had a particular overlay of selection bias there in terms of picking the ones that are going to say things we like, because we don't necessarily know their opinions ahead of time. We just know that they've got an interesting story, and anything could have emerged. But what they're describing is being more integrated care, and certainly less cowboys in that space, which is good, which is promising, certainly, to say the least. David then said, do we need to confront the source, not the messenger? Yeah, if we could identify the source. I think one of the things that's interesting is that you don't always know. It's kind of the world's easiest thing for any therapist to always just point upwards. Like, I only feel and think this because there was some font of wisdom that told me this, and therefore there's no individual autonomy and agency to the person that's giving out, say, false information or misleading advice. I think that's the thing that's a concern, is that yes, you want to always identify what it is that is a position of influence or power or whatever it might be that might be the source of misinformation or misguided, or perpetuating misguided beliefs. But I do think on an individual clinician level, or particularly groups of clinicians that become institutions of themselves, if they're perpetuating certain mischaracterized views, I think that's something that we need to find a way to. I always talk about distributed responsibility. It's kind of that we've got to find an accountability framework that's not just all in one direction. And so, whilst ideally, I think that there would be more ire pointed at organizations that then perpetuate falsehoods, the individuals, be that clinicians or even patients themselves, if they become advocates, it's something that actually they're sort of an appropriate level of polite and professional call-out culture of a sort would be smart for us to refine these things. And that's a fine line to toe, but it's something that I do admit that we naturally, as caring and empathetic clinicians, are unlikely to confront patients and athletes as we would each other, rightly or wrongly. And that might be that we're over confrontational with each other and then under to them, or it could be that it's sort of out of kilter in a different way. But I'm all ears, because I'm not sure I've got this. Part of the reason for me chewing it over with you today is because I'm not sure I've got that balance right. I'm not sure as an industry we've got that balance right. And so I really appreciate your thoughts, and thank you, David, for your comments. 3 questions in a row. So really appreciate that. Always good that someone on this show's got good questions. Let's have a little look what else we've got in here then. Let's see what Jenny's saying today. Hi, Jenny Archer. Thanks for joining. It's not about my pelvis is out. It's about putting it in weekly that's wrong. No matter how well you explain, the patient may still feel that is the problem, and you have to learn how to talk with patients honestly at their level of understanding. Right. Well, yeah, I think that the problem of a therapist then inferring that they are putting it back in on a weekly basis is certainly more of a problem than the actual underlying belief and opinion of that patient. However, I suppose it's the my pelvis is out is still wrong. If you're saying that one is wrong and one isn't, I disagree. The My pelvis is out, depending on what they mean by that. Because if you say, "What do you mean by out?" or "What do you mean by gone?" and stuff, it's like, well, my pelvis is out of structural alignment, and therefore is then manipulated into. They'll often articulate that, and you can imagine I'm Mr. Question Master, so I'm forever asking that extra questions underneath it. So, oh, my pelvis is out. What do you mean by that? Well, I've seen the structure of a pelvis. I've been shown that mine gets twisted out of shape and then it gets manipulated back into shape. And so they're describing a structural phenomenon that I'm arguing is wrong. Now, I don't know if we disagree there, Jenny. I don't know if you feel that the SIJ moves far more than I do, or you feel that there are structural alignment issues at the pelvis in a mechanical sense that are relevant to pathology than I do. You know, people, there's a range of opinion I know in the profession there, and I don't know you enough to know your take on that. But I'd say that there's two things that are wrong there. There's, of course, a priority in terms of interprofessional dialogue to improve the fact that a therapist that's perpetuating the notion that they can correct that is a primary issue, I'd say. But the actual, whether or not you've said there, you seem to be questioning how wrong it is that the person thinks that the pelvis is out. And if when they mean by out is, and not it feels a bit weird, they mean that it's structurally out of alignment, then I'm saying that that's wrong. We need to find a way to appropriately and gently correct for that misbelief, because that for me is a falsehood, according to my reading of the evidence anyway. Paula Clayton. Hi, Paula. It's not that the patients come from a place of previous experience, or is it not? Sorry, is it not that the patients come from a place of previous experience? I had this treatment plus or minus rehab. It worked. It got me back to X. Should we ignore that? Is it worthy? It's worthy of discussion, right? I mean, there's certainly nothing from me, and I hope that you know, Paula, that I'm not at all describing anything that I'm thinking we need to be dismissive of patients' previous experiences, especially those that have worked. And it's valuable, incredibly valuable information. Especially it's difficult because sometimes we can hear a story and we can conceive of reasons as to why it worked that is different to what the patient feels. And that's what's challenging, is that trying to get them to understand, well, I'm really pleased to hear that that intervention helped you. I would say that the reason it helped is slightly different to what you think. Now, that might be a difference without a distinction, and I don't think it matters. And sometimes it kind of does matter, because sometimes people feel that the reason it helped is because it corrected this thing that we disagree with, and they are therefore suggesting that sometimes it's that I had this structural fault, massage helped correct for that for time, therefore now it's got diminishing returns on that treatment. Therefore, I'm structured enough now that I don't think therapy help instead of a surgeon, because there's an amount that I was able to, and now it's not working. Therefore, I'm broken sufficiently to need surgery. When surgery might even close to indicate it. Because what the original changed or didn't change relates, and if you don't find a way to at least a level of variety to that explanation, then I see that with my multi, my new work, especially if you don't find a way to use at least a variety of options there, or doubt to the mechanisms, the interventions, or people's why, then like that fact that sometimes though, yeah, I've got to have a wash, rinse, repeat, and if someone's fine then for years on end or never has a problem with that body part before, again, it doesn't matter. But it also means that if they then injure themselves in a completely different fashion that's not related, then their sense of what they need, or the sense of robustness of that human, sometimes does take a bit of a beating. I think less so with athletes, because there's so much else going on and they've got so much of a body read going on. So the more elite you get, I think that matters less. But certainly in Joe Blogs, I think it's quite important. I found myself, I do challenge sort of misconceptions quite significantly. Hi, Joe Turner. Thanks for joining today. A long comment here. Let me just have a little skim. I think it's helpful for us to recognize relative areas of expertise. With us, it's clinical knowledge and evidence-based. Patients bring their experience of their condition. It doesn't mean you have to change practice, but patients deserve to be heard and understood. We owe it to them to explain why our rationale is appropriate, with their account, feelings, and experience acknowledged. I mean, it's a fantastic point, Joe. You put it far better than I could. I think what's interesting there, and certainly something I'd encourage us to think about, is how this maps directly onto what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. For those that tuned in, where we're balancing sort of subjective with objective, how do you map lived experience onto data? This is a similar thing, is that, of course, this isn't me suddenly railing against integration of the patient voice. It'd be hypocritical, because I've been someone who's a big fan of it and continues to be, but it's just that let's not pretend that we're not biasing narratives that sometimes, or platforming narratives that suit what we're trying to do and trying to change. I think if we appropriately integrate it and recognize where that expertise lies in someone's story. I often say, it's why my podcasting is not dissimilar to a subjective assessment, right? I'm sat across from another human being. I know what I know, but they know what they know. I know things that they might not from a clinical level, maybe because I've studied it, and they know they're the experts in their own story, the experts in their own condition, and that appropriate blend of our own expertise is going to come to, instead of facing each other, we're often side by side looking at a problem together by the end of the assessment, on that metaphor, if you don't mind it. And so, yeah, I think it's a really lovely point from Joe there. I think it's really important. Paul has then said, I'm not sure I'm very good at hiding my opinion on my face when someone says my pelvis or spine is out. Yeah, how good's your poker face, your clinical poker face? Because you don't want to be rude and sort of like scowl or laugh or what have you. But sometimes, yeah, if there's some sort of spine curling, is that toe curling things that get said sometimes, where it's like, oh, that's not good. And fortunately, Paul has said, I'm not dismissive. That's nice. I don't want to be that guy. Let's have a look. We've got some brilliant comments coming in. So I'm sorry if I don't get up to all of them. But Kath Piper, you know what I'm like with Kath Piper's comments. I'm always willing to put them up. They're always brilliant. Let's see. Patients reporting to others, media, friends, etc. has a purpose. It doesn't mean that the therapist actually did do that or say that. Right. Okay. Let's start with that. Absolutely. Great point. It's something that can sometimes be secondhand. But in this instance, I'm describing something that can be quite firsthand. So a patient is, I'm talking about, say, a patient's perception of both their problem and what the solutions did to them. And so I'm not necessarily meaning that there can be that Chinese whispers effect, although, of course, it is very much a potent thing. In this instance, I'm probably not really talking as much about that. It's more about someone's direct narrative that they're explaining, that first person account that we're often amplifying, the patient stories that we're integrating into our education systems, or have been on Physio Matters did a Patient Matters series. We've had patients on panels. We've got athletes on the Therapy Live sports show. So it's more about that first person account rather than the Chinese whispers, although of course that is a really good point. Kath said, surely we've had incidents where a patient has reported that we did something amazing or not, and it wasn't a true record of what we did. No, that's definitely true. Yeah, the amount of times you've got, whatever you did last time, sometimes it's something in the assessment, isn't it? Oh, that when you lifted my leg up, that really sorted me out. It's basically like you did a straight leg raise on someone, and they think that that's the thing that then sorted them out and stuff. So yeah, absolutely, that happens all the time, doesn't it? It's very strange. Jenny's clarified. Jenny's got back to me. That's brilliant. Let's see what Jenny said. I don't believe anything is out unless a subluxation or dislocation, but pain often feels that way to very intelligent patients, and their explanation of how it feels despite your explanation to the contrary. Oh, absolutely, yeah. So it's interesting. I was clarifying with Jenny as to whether or not me and her just happen to disagree about what might or not be in or out in the pelvis. And yeah, sounds like we agree there, Jenny, is that it's more about the patient and it can be, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has had this before, where you get a massive QL spasm, or you end up in a really funny sleep funny or whatever, and it feels like the perception of feeling out of alignment, and then technically biomechanically being wonky in a sense, or through tension, etc. It's incredibly potent feeling, and it's hopefully we don't need to send people on a degree and then 10 years of experience in order to counter that internal perception, but we need to be forgiving of the fact that patients can get bent out of shape in their beliefs, as well as they feel bent out of shape in their person. So yeah, it's absolutely the case that we need to, despite our explanations, etc., we're countering something that's an internal feeling that's actually really quite powerful. So really interesting, and certainly agree. But it's more that for me, it's a balance of not just countering the obviously I want to try and improve the therapy game in such a way that we get less poor messaging that's out there, less we talk about unwarranted variation. So we wanted to reduce unwarranted variation in the profession, in MSK industry. But also I do think that there is a place for finding a way to appropriately challenge patients without us coming across as discompassionate. And I don't just mean in person there where we're negotiating in a clinic room. I think we all have to do that. I'm sort of meaning on the broad level when we're thinking about interprofessional education and the integration of the patient narrative. I think that there's areas where we need to probably, it's disrespectful, I think, in some ways, and I think I'm guilty of this, to potentially be treating patients with kid gloves, but also we need some room as therapists to be able to challenge patient advocates in such a way that then isn't coming across as rude if we were to say we disagree on this, and try and have that back and forth with them interprofessionally as they're in that space. And I think that that is a fine line. I'm interested in how we sort of toe that, which is really interesting. David said he wrote a post on his hip being out. It's a perception, not a reality. Yeah, it can definitely feel that way, can't it? There's so many parts. I mean, I'm a bit of a crock myself, so I've had various different things where I've my sense of something has only been shaped better by my knowledge rather than my instincts. And if I wasn't a physio and I was an engineer, etc., as most of my family are, is that we sometimes think in that direction, then you'd be worried about what is or isn't out. Evie's posted a lovely a post here, which I definitely encourage you to go and listen to if you get a chance. She's put a link on. If you're not watching this on Facebook, then head to Facebook and you'll be able to click this link. Patient turned pain coach Amy believes that the SIG instability narrative is negligently damaging. I think I've heard that Amy be interviewed before. It might even be on that from Evie, which is a fantastic interview and a fantastic voice. So please do go and have a look at that, because it's an interesting thing to hear of someone that feels that they got sort of scarred by that idea, and how we could better unpick that. But equally, I think one of the key things is we need to make sure that we find a way to recognize, this is where I started, isn't it? We need to recognize, I think, where the where it kind of originates, in a sense that we're not kidding ourselves to think that the patient advocates that I obviously love and want to perpetuate their message, you know, Joletta Belton, Tina Price, Pete Moore, Sam Williams, we had on the show, Adrian McGregor, former patient of mine, various different anecdotes and testimonials that we have in clinic that we sometimes want to share. Their story is often representative of some, but equally there's people that haven't had their mind changed by quality care and rehab, that they're still the public, they're still who we see. Let's not kid ourselves to think that that doesn't matter, and we probably need to find a way to better platform that, or acknowledge that that's something that we need to find a way to at least keep in touch with, because otherwise we kid ourselves to think things are changing more than they are. So yes, thank you so much for everyone for that. I know we're out of time now. I'll just a couple more final comments. Paul has said, oh, I've lost it now. I'm often told that my direct approach, long history in sport, refreshing and gives clarity. I don't think we always need kid gloves. Paul, I really like that. You know, I admire your style and approach, and I think it's very well refined. I think that I'm super guilty, maybe even on this show, of sort of talking around a problem sometimes a bit too gently when it's not necessary, and sometimes you don't need to say things like I do 3 ways to get to the point. So I like your appropriate directness, if that's a word. Evie said, such a good point about interacting with patient advocates, Jack. Thank you. I'm glad I usually try and make a good point a show, so I'm glad I got there. Right, that's enough for today, I'm afraid. I'm sorry if I missed out your comments. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate you as always. And do tune in tomorrow. We've got some great shows this week, but particularly some great guests next week. John Ware's joining me about American politics on the eve of the election. So American election next week, if you've heard. Tuesday, John Ware's going to be joining me to talk a bit like Sandy came from the left of politics. John's on the right of politics, talking about that, and so that'll be fascinating, especially questions that will overlay into sort of American healthcare and stuff. I know we've got a bit of a UK-centric audience, particularly on the live show because it's in your lunch break in the UK. But then also next Thursday, Becky from the Massage Matters podcast is going to be joining me and talking a little bit about that side of the industry, which is important. And we'll no doubt get into the grips of manual therapy and how she's changed her mind and back in, you know, and as I have. So we'll get stuck into that, which will be really good, talking about some hands-on stuff. I've also had an idea that we're going to probably go ahead with, although I just need a couple more green lights to know it. But the first week of any month, I'm thinking of making that a real quite a I want to be supportive to my private practice colleagues. And so the first week of any month, I'm going to go for Marketing Mondays, Wellbeing Wednesdays, and Finance Fridays. And so with some special guests, hopefully that will be returners, but basically we're going to be themed. So the first week of every month, we're going to go for Marketing Mondays, Wellbeing Wednesdays, and Finance Fridays, which will certainly be unapologetically a little bit private practice centric to support my fellow business folk in this weird and wonderful time. But thank you as ever. Appreciate you all, and I'll see you tomorrow.